Hello, and welcome back to Dolby Creator Talks. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Here is a thought-provoking question. Have we been doing independent film financing all wrong? Or is there a better way? To help answer that, we welcome back our good friend and Dolby Institute Fellowship winner, Carlos López Estrada, for another of his excellent satellite sessions, which we're bringing to you once again in partnership with Anti-Gravity Academy and the Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment. Today's panel includes the producers behind Sing Sing, which made a big splash at last year's Toronto International Film Festival and is now playing in theaters. Directed by Greg Kwedar, the film is notable for its unique casting approach, blending actors such as Colman Domingo, who gives a standout performance, with real-life, formerly incarcerated individuals. It's set in the Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York, focusing on the prison's theater troupe. But one of the most interesting aspects of the production was how it was financed, and in particular, how it used a profit-sharing model where all crew members, including those non-professional actors, received a share of the film's profits. So how did that work? Well, it's a little complicated, so we'll let Carlos take it from here.
Originally premiering in the 2023 Toronto Film Festival, Sing Sing is based on the work of a prison arts program named Rehabilitation Through the Arts. The story of the film follows a wrongfully imprisoned man played by Colman Domingo, who finds purpose in staging and performing the theater group's first ever comedy. With a cast including many formerly incarcerated actors, Sing Sing is a perfect example of how independent film can embrace, through authenticity, a radical sense of collaboration and an incredible purpose-driven ethos behind the filmmaking, which is telling human stories in a human way. Now, as we all know, the other side of filmmaking, the behind the scenes, can look very different from the movie that we see on screen, with very large pay disparities between people who are making top dollar and those who can barely afford rent. In the case of Sing Sing, however, there's a radical sense of humanity that also continues into the production, and more specifically into their financial model, which we have come here to learn about today. So we decided to host this panel not only to celebrate this incredible accomplishment of indie filmmaking, but also to learn lessons from this team and to find ways that we can all implement the practices in equity and in fairness into our own projects. So, okay, that was a long intro. Without further ado, please help me in welcoming Greg Kwedar, who is a writer, director, and producer. Beyond directing Sing Sing, he also directed the 2016 South by Southwest Film Festival Audience Award winner, Transpecos. He co-wrote and produced Jockey, which premiered at the 2021 Sundance Film Festival in the U.S. Dramatic Competition, and won the Audience Award at the AFI Film Festival. Greg, he's also a good friend and a person who I respect dearly, dearly. So thanks for joining us, Greg.
Thanks for having me. I didn't realize, maybe I should have waited to come in until you were finished, but I jumped in.
No, that was perfect.
Hey, everybody.
Next, we have Clint Bentley, who is a director and a writer. Beyond co-writing Sing Sing, he directed and co-wrote Jockey with Greg, based on the life of his father, which was named one of the top 10 indie films of 2021 by the National Board of Review. He also co-wrote and produced Transpecos alongside Greg, and recently wrapped production of his second feature as a director, Train Dreams. It's an adaptation of Dennis Johnson's Pulitzer Prize-nominated novella starring Joel Edgerton and Felicity Jones. Clint, hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us.
I gave Greg solidarity by just sitting here while you said all
that. He's coming live from the edit room, so
apologies.
Double appreciation. And next we have Monique Walton, who is an independent producer, 2024 recipient of the Film Independent Spirit Awards Producers Award. Her films include Sing Sing, Bull, and the feature documentary Hollow Tree. She was a 2016 Sundance Creative Producing Fellow, a 2020 Rotterdam Producing Fellow, and 2021 Cannes Producers Network Fellow. Uh, Monique, you're amazing. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Thanks for
Um,
having me.
and lastly, I would like to welcome our guest moderator for today, the amazing Valerie Bush. She is my producing partner. We worked together on our movie Dee Dee. She's also the head of production here at Anti-Gravity Academy. And we figured that it would be very helpful to have her POV in this conversation and invited her to ask some more specific physical production related questions that I will never be able to understand as well as she does because she's a magician
Hopefully we can answer them
within
too.
perfection.
We'll do our best.
I'm sure
No
you
one will be able to answer them.
can.
So, okay, thank you all. Welcome. And Val, I'll kick it over to you because I know that you have the first question.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for joining everyone that's here today. We just want to start off with taking a step back and looking at the overall picture of the financial model that you guys do, and if you guys can just take us through what it is for someone that might not have any idea.
Sure, I'll jump in. Firstly, thanks everyone for being here. This is pretty amazing. Maybe the biggest webinar I've been on in a long time. And what up, Texas? I see a lot of people from Texas in the chat, which is cool. Uh, so yeah, the model is based on pay parity and on parity overall. And the idea is that across the board, everyone gets paid the same rate. So that includes the three of us, Colman Domingo, the lead of our film, throughout the entire cast and crew, and through post and distribution and marketing. Everyone's getting paid the same, and then everyone gets a share in the film. So everyone participates in the profits of the movie. And we structured that in a way that if depending on the phase of the movie that you work on, you get a portion of the profits. So if you work in pre-production, production, post-production, or marketing, you would get the profits for that phase. So what we're saying is that everyone has the same intrinsic value, and the only real variable is the time that you work on the project. And it was very, radical to me joining the project to think about how can we do something differently. And in a movie specifically like this one, where we were really trying to make it as a community and erase the hierarchy, which Greg can talk about, how do we really make that built into the DNA of the movie and the structure of the film?
Amazing. And obviously, people who work here in film understand just how incredibly radical and unusual this structure is. And to those who are just getting into our industry, I think it's important to just know that no one really has done it like this before. And this is like really a first of its kind. So just as a follow-up to Val's question, I would love to ask Clint and Greg if you can share a little bit about the seed of this idea, because this is a model that I'm sure you've been finessing, but you've experimented with in the past successfully. And if there's anything that you can tell us about what sparked this idea, how it evolved, and how did it finally reach the place that it has with Sing Sing?
It came from, we were working on our film, our second film together, Jockey, and it started out of necessity, and then just bred into like, once we were in this place trying to make Jockey, of just trying to answer problems within the industry. It really came like a bit at a time as we were putting that film together. And the big seed of it was we were trying to make Jockey more traditionally within the marketplace, like a lot of people are probably trying to do with an indie film right now, of like going out and pitching it to production companies in LA, trying to get $1 million, $1.5 million, and make the movie. And it just was not happening for a few different reasons. But it just like, it wasn't happening. We realized at a certain point, like we could spend the next 10 years trying to make this way, or we could just go make it. And once we leaned into just deciding to go make it and really only take as much as we needed and as much as we could raise at that time. And it became a much lower budget affair, like under $500,000. And once it became a movie like that, we knew we'd be asking everybody to like really take a hit on their fees to do it, just because that's the typical thing in an indie film. And so it started from really this macro idea of like, if we are asking everybody to take a chance on this movie like we are, then we shouldn't be the only ones succeeding off this movie if it actually succeeds, and everybody should enjoy in that success. And so then it just started, like Monique kind of, as Monique outlines the tenets of it, it just started one by one of like, first, like everybody's going to get paid the same. But then if everybody gets paid the same, we were really struck by how in indie film, when you're putting a film together, profits on the back end are split 50-50 between creatives and investors. And on the creative side, there's a lot of like negotiating and haggling of like, okay, you get that many points, but you get that many points. And it's very fungible. But then on the investor side, it's very clear cut. Like, how much money did you put in? That's what percentage. The percentage of the budget you put in is the percentage of points you get. That's it, on the investor side. And so we wanted to do something clear cut like that as well. That was just very straightforward. And just as Monique pointed out, just made everybody the same value, and the only differential being time. And then we also, the last thing is like, we knew a lot of friends who didn't like, who had points on other films and never saw anything come back from that, because a lot of times, even if you make a very low budget indie, you don't sell it for more than you made it for. And so we wanted to like split those profits off the top, so that we're splitting off the gross of like first money in. So if you make a film for 300-400 grand and you only make 100 grand on the sale, you still split a little bit of money with everybody. And so that's really, it just came from the seed of trying to make that and just trying to answer problems within the industry.
Oh, amazing. Greg, is there anything that
Anything
you'd
to
like
add,
to
Greg?
add?
Just kind of again coming into the philosophy, because we're gonna give you guys some nuts and bolts things, but and these are things that we think are replicable, that we believe that you can sort of carry into your projects. We've done it now on 2 films on 2 different scales, and we'll talk about walking between something under $500,000 with a 10-person crew on the backside of a racetrack into a 50-person crew with 25 cast. And in many ways, the impact of it deepened, and was more accessible and almost more radical as we moved in, and both were successful in many ways, not just in terms of what it opens up in terms of the creative work, but also what it, yields in terms of an opportunity for profit by lowering the risk and the cost of these projects, accessibility to distributors. It really is something that kind of worked through the whole ecosystem. But the main thing we don't want to see happen is to limit your own imagination of where you can take this. This is a group of people who looked at a process that many of us have been inheriting from the movies that have come before us, generation after generation, and just kind of have blindly accepted it. And we've never really paused to say, is this healthy? Is this the best way to do it? Can we treat each other a little better? Can we look after artists? Can we as artists stop being the last in line? Do we have real value? We're not just sitting there with a hat in our hands. We're bringing something of equal, if not more, value to the table alongside our financial partners. And it's time to start recognizing that, and also kind of questioning this historic system of above and below the line. You probably all have heard like terminology like that. And I think there's something broken in that definition. There's literally a division between the artists that make this movie possible. And we, I think through this work have sought to take an eraser and erase that line and say that we're all here creating a movie and making it possible. And another thing about the sort of hierarchy of pay that exists with above and below the line is we're also saying by this pay stratification that certain people's ideas are more valuable than others. And by flattening that hierarchy and making the difference between someone making more or less being time, we're saying that all these ideas have value and are worthy to be sort of expressed, which starts to create this culture of a mindset shift from an employee mindset to a partner mindset, and creating the conditions where great work can come forward and you can empty the tank, And as I was entering this business a long time ago, I was an accounting major in college. And as I entered the business, one of the things that I kind of recognized immediately is just this lack of transparency and a lot of waste, honestly, a lot of things that don't show up on the screen. And those were two things that we really sought to question through this as well, is why do these budgets kind of keep inflating and grow the way they do? And I think a big reason for that is how information moves. And then traditionally in these films, producers are the only ones that hold on to this information. They hold on to it really tightly, and then they negotiate with everyone on a movie like one to one, and as a result, if you're an artist being negotiated with a producer and you know nothing about the rest of the budget or how the movie is built, all you can really do in that silo is fight for the most that you can get or what your quote is. And inevitably that producer is going to come back to you and say, don't you love this? We don't have the money. Won't you take less? We can't afford that quote. And oftentimes as artists, we would, because we do love it. And the worst feeling in the world is finally bending to that, giving that up for the love of the game, and then to find out maybe the producers held on to more and didn't give anything up, or that your peers held their ground and and then that's the footing that you're engaging with this work from. And it is kind of a shitty feeling, and not a place that's going to engender a healthy environment that builds trust.
Just to say, this is like the most inspiring thing I have ever heard in terms of how to produce a movie. And I think that all of us who do indie film, like, are very aware of these disparities, and it just has not happened, or I have not witnessed people have so like aggressively decided to do something about it. And actually now we have something to point at and say, they did it, it worked. It's an indie film that did well critically and in the box office, and like there's just no reason why this couldn't be replicated. And like that's how real change happens. And I just saying what everyone already knows, but just restating it, that I'm so happy that you three are doing the work you're doing. And I think it's major in a way that we'll look back at this point and realize that things were different before and after this movie. So anyway, I just wanted to share some real appreciation for it. Sorry, but I'll pass it over to you, Valerie.
Yeah, you guys have been able to do this with 2 films now, which is really cool. Has there been anything that you learned from Jockey that you maybe adapted in the model and changed it for Sing Sing?
One big thing that comes to mind is, we had minimum sets at first on Jockey in terms of how long you'd have to work on a section of the film in order to get points and equity from that place. And then we realized as it went along, and I'll say this as a broader point as well, but we realized as it went along that like we really did have to find a way to pull everybody into it. And sometimes the person coming, for example, in both of these films, you have a lot of people who are first-time actors who are giving a lot of themselves to a lot of their souls. They're giving to the film and bearing their stories on film. And to not include them just because they didn't work the same number of days didn't feel equitable. And so we made space for that as well. And I think like the thing I was going to say a second ago, Carlos, and it dovetails into this of like, we're constantly looking at like, how can it be better? And we made it better from Jockey to Sing Sing. We made it better from like Jockey in production to Jockey in post. And I think like that is something that like we can't, if we're trying to make our industry better, let perfect get in the way of something that can be better and a better way to approach the industry. And I think like what we're really looking forward to as more people do it is like finding even better ways that we don't even see at the moment to take this forward and move it ahead.
Mhm.
It's exciting to think about where it could go. Oh, sorry, Greg, were you going to say something?
No, but now that you've given me a window, of course I'll say something. No, I was just thinking also anecdotally of like what Clint was talking about of like listening to what's happening in the movie, not like having principles, because it's as you heard at the very beginning, as Monique teed this up, pretty simple concept, you know. It's just hard to follow through because you will inevitably meet
Yeah.
roadblocks and things that kind of question it. And in some ways, having the model is a position of strength and solidarity because a lot of people have bought into it. And so when someone comes to the table and is trying to bend that or push you off of your mark, and it, you know, and if you didn't have all of these people who had come behind and bought into it, maybe you would be more tempted to give on, you know, some of these standards. But, you know, we really had the position of strength there and solidarity that kind of helped us follow through. But then within that, I was just thinking, you know, as Clint was saying, you know, and we'll refresh this a few times throughout of like exactly how this works and we get into the nuts and bolts. But you know, the pay parity is the guaranteed compensation of being paid the same rate. That's pegged to a union scale with SAG, which was the union we worked with on both films. And then we pinned that and stretched that all the way through the movie. And then equity was based on the life cycle of the movie, development, prep, production, post, promotion, minimum amount of time that you had to work to earn that equity within that phase, usually like 2 weeks. And if you cross that, you would earn the equity from that phase. And then the third thing that we did on Jockey was we split money off the top, you know, first money in that came in that to our company, 60% to investors, 40% to crew, till the investors made 120 back. And then we split it 50-50. As we moved into Sing Sing with a bigger scale, we were intending to do all three of those things right up until the production. We were still raising money. We didn't close our financing until like 2 weeks before shooting. And we had signed on most of our crew and cast at that point. And we found an industry partner who was on board for a lot of the ideas and the models, which is a big step because Jockey we've made totally outside of the business, solely private. And now Sing Sing was going to have like a true like industry partner involved. And there were some things in that final tier in terms of splitting money off the top that we can't like talk about exactly how we solve this for some confidentiality reasons, but we needed to shift a little bit of that third pillar of the model to make Sing Sing happen. And we came to a compromise that felt, you know, like parallel to what we were already doing. It just looked a little differently. And normally, I think on a movie, you would just email everybody and say, like, this is the thing, you know, you know, take it or leave it. And when you're kind of working in a community driven way like this, if you're really buying into it, then you need to think about how you make decisions a little bit differently as leadership. And so one of the big things that we did was that Clint and Monique called every single person on our cast and crew and talked them through the decision that we had on the table and laid out the reasons why we felt like it would, you know, serve the project and still be meaningful to everyone involved and get the movie made. And what was really special about that was one, we got the buy-in, but two, it's about access to learning and information and things that people normally are closed off to and how this all works. And I remember Clint and Monique coming back and being like, you know, I just talked to, you know, someone in the lighting department who really hadn't ever gotten access to how waterfalls work and now understands that. And, you know, and not only buys in, but, you know, has something to carry forward in terms of a learning of how this works.
I think
Yeah,
the educational component of it is amazing. Oh, sorry, Val.
no, it's okay. I was just gonna say the same thing. And Monique, I have a question for you specifically about like what Greg just said. For like me thinking about it and knowing how a waterfall works, I just imagine like thinking about your pool of points that you have for your crew and how to divide that up. And what happens when you are in post-production and you're like, oh no, I have to like hire, X, Y, and Z more crew. Like, how do you allocate to make sure that you aren't running out of points at the end of the day to allocate to those people?
Yeah, Monique, how do we do that?
Hey, either Val or Monique, would you mind just doing like a 10-second explanation of what like a waterfall and points are, just for people who may
Monique, feel
be
free to take it.
wondering?
Yeah, so the waterfall is, essentially the order in which the money gets distributed when a film is delivered and distributed and hopefully or is sold and gets money in, and it essentially delineates who gets paid in what order. And typically, like, you're going to take, like, there's going to be fees that are taken off the top that are like your standard kind of union and guild fees and sales agent fees and legal fees. Those always like get taken off right off the top. And then if you have any sort of deferrals, that might be like position two. It's like literally the waterfall is like position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And for every film, it can be different because depending on the deals that you do with your financiers, someone might say like, I want to get paid, first, or, so it really just depends on how your waterfall is structured.
And it's a literal hierarchy, right? So being top of the waterfall is the most advantageous, and being the bottom means that you're likely not ever going to make any
Yeah, I
money
mean,
off
if you
them.
think of like Mad Max Fury Road as the like at the top, the water's gushing out, and at the bottom, everyone's just getting tiny little drops of water.
At the bottom are filmmakers.
Yes.
But yeah, and then once you get to the net profits of the film, meaning like all of the fees have been paid, and loans, if you have loans potentially, or deferrals, you're getting to the net profits. And then that's it typically in the as Greg mentioned, I think in the indie world, it's typically split 50-50. 50% goes to the investors and 50% goes to the creative team, which is, typically the producers and the actors. And a lot of times, usually there's like no more than, like, let's say 10 people in that creative team that are splitting those profits. And like usually that involves like the producers, the director, writer, potentially a couple of the lead actors, and that's it. And like, but yeah, as you said, Val, like there's definitely like on ours where it's like an accordion where we have, upwards of almost 90 people in our profit participation. You have to really remain aware of like how many points you have, like, from the beginning to allocate. And I think that that's something in terms of crew size that factors in as well, right? Like, and on indie films, you're making this by any means necessary, and you're typically remaining very small. And I think that that was something that we talked about in the beginning as well as part of the structure, is like we have to have crew, each department was very, very lean. And so everyone had to kind of come up with ways of creatively, doing their best work and achieving their vision, but within that, really limited crew size.
I wanted to ask, just in thinking about the future of this model, the model works so perfectly for the movies that you have done. I think specifically for Sing Sing, because it deals with themes of inequality and radical collaboration. And obviously you guys made it so it's like very much catered to the types of filmmakers you are, and you lead with humanity and very much care about these issues. But as we're thinking about other productions potentially adapting the model, like how feasible do you imagine that a movie that does not have you three involved in the producing team, or a movie that, if I'm making tomorrow a superhero movie that, still independent but not quite as like perfectly tailored for the model, like, do you think that is a possibility? And what is kind of like what do you imagine is the process for that to become a reality, where someone can just adapt it without all these connections? Sorry, that was a very long question.
It's a great question. Clint, do you want to start, or?
It's something we're talking through a lot right now, and the three of us are trying to work through. And my like answer on it at the moment is like, we don't know totally. I think like we've shown under, for indie films, it's actually very easy. And these like, I think if you do it on a film under like $4 to $5 million, I think from what we've all learned, like, not that we've even reached that high necessarily with our films, but that seems like very doable. You can take this and do that. The thing that's important about it is, even if it gets adjusted, it's about thinking about the core tenets of it, just thinking differently about how people share in equity and how people are paid. I don't know, Greg and Monique might have a more cogent answer in terms of specifics, but I think all of us feel that the tenets can be applied no matter the scale of the movie, in a way to think about how can we be more fair to each other, and how can we be more thoughtful to everybody on the film.
Well, what I wanted to add was, again, coming back to Jockey and Sing Sing. These are both independent films, but operating at different scales. Again, 10-person crew to a 50-person crew, and different things got more meaningful as we scaled up. One of the things particularly was, there's kind of like a bell curve in terms of like just taking the guaranteed rate, that's pegged to SAG scale. Is like Colman Domingo taking huge pay cut to be involved in this. A lot of our crew were kind of operating pretty similarly to what they might earn on most projects. And then people entering the business at an entry-level job like a production assistant, we're making a huge gains in ways that had previously not been available to them. And that was one of the most surprising areas, honestly, was our production assistants, who are, people who, oftentimes it's a proving ground to like, finding your way into this industry is a lot of where our future talent is emerging, but a lot of people get ground out. And I remember one of my favorite memories of the shoot was wrapping one of our lead production assistants, who, one, when she wrapped, gave a speech, which, if that gives you an indication of like the culture on set, many movies may not even know the names of the production assistants who worked on a movie, but they're like a legitimate partner on the same playing field as the star of the film, and felt just as, had just as much a place at the table to stand on a chair and give a speech to the entire crew on her last day. And a big thing that she shared was, she was planning to leave the business, and it kind of lost faith in it, and kind of on a whim got this, crew call. Maybe it was from you, Monique, or Miriam, our UPM, but thought to give it one last try, and the fact that she was sort of seen and treated the way she was, and was able to actually survive and pay her bills and rent, decided to stay in the business as a result of this film. And I think that's a very specific anecdote that maybe speaks larger to the ways that this project can kind of start to open things up for people. And we are experimenting and seeing how far can we push it. We asked that question between, a big thing when we met Monique was like, we did this on Jockey this way. Can it work here? We don't know, but let's try. And through a series of conversations, it started to attract the right people to it. We met Colman, and, we presented on the first Zoom this idea of this model. We were like, we can do this the normal way where we pay you a lot of money. I don't know when we'll make that movie, if ever, or we can do it this way. And especially in a story like this, when we have so many men with lived experience, they can have literal ownership over their own story. And I can guarantee you we'll make it in the window that you have later that summer. And he said, that sounds beautiful. Let's do it. Clint and I, as we're kind of growing as filmmakers, and I would assume Monique too, is like, how do we use our leverage? If we grow in profile, can we use that, our profile to lean on these, companies that want to hire us as filmmakers, to try to bend them little by little, degree by degree, towards an ethos like this, better working conditions for artists, better pay, less stratification, ownership opportunities. It's not sort of having a sea change overnight. It's more of us taking strides like this that accumulate, that create stronger precedents that other people can point to and say, well, they did it. So, if that worked here, then maybe it can work for our film.
That's so beautiful, guys. I mean, like Carlos was saying earlier, it's truly inspiring. Monique, do you think that like you've obviously produced films without this model, and now you've gotten to produce with it? Do you think that it was difficult for you to dive into this model and embrace it and leave the traditional practices behind? Or are you obsessed with it and you never want to produce a film any other way?
Oh, it was horrible in the beginning. No, no. I mean, it like I mean, I think that my reaction to it was similar to the other crew members when they first heard about it, which was just like, yes, like let's do something different, please, because it feels, you can't quite place your finger on why it just feels so painful and hard to make indie movies. I mean, there's many reasons, but it felt like a radical and refreshing and exciting in a way to, like when I think about producing, every film is like a startup, right? And it's like, how do you and creating that culture is really important on set to just try to to make sure that everyone's kind of like rowing in the same direction and creating the same movie. And so we all it sounds really nice to say you're making a community-based film, but how do you really kind of put that into the actual structure of your movie in a way that people feel like they're a part of the community and they feel empowered to bring their whole selves to the movie. And I thought this was like a really exciting way to do that. And it was something that I had never heard of. So I was really excited about it. And as a producer, it also just makes my job much easier because the model is the model. It's like there's no negotiating, and so it's just like it is what it is. And I think and again, like having Colman Domingo on board, having your number one on the call sheet saying that they completely agree to do this model, having all of your department heads get excited about it. That also, it's like I think that there's people kind of then feel like they can trust that we are saying what we are going to do, what we say we're going to do. Because again, as I believe Greg mentioned, it's like there is a lot of scorched earth and there is a lot of just mistrust in the industry where it's just like, oh yeah, the producer's telling me like I'm gonna get a point on this, yeah, whatever, I roll. But this was really real. Um, so I think that there were just ways that it just felt like, how do we lean into this? How do we embrace this so that it feels like it's always just adding to what we're making and what we're doing, and adding to the culture. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I was, I also have been trying to wrap my head around it as a producer, and I think it's a really amazing thing. And one of the things that I feel like someone's initial reaction might be is the department heads or the producers or directors might be like, oh, well, I'm going to be putting so much time into this, versus someone else getting paid on the same rate. But I was just doing some quick math on the side on my calculator, and realistically, a producer that is making a standard indie rate is already going to be cutting their salary by so much and working way under minimum wage. And the way that you guys have it structured, honestly, is probably more fair at the end of the day to everyone across the board. And I don't think that you might realize that as soon as you hear about this model, but if you sit down and actually break down the math, then that's how it comes across to me, at least. It's very
You're
awesome.
totally
Yeah,
right.
100%.
You're probably even more fairly compensated for the time that you spend
Yeah.
this way. And your time is more regarded than, Val and I were just doing some math recently about we're not gonna name which productions, but just the amount of hours that we've put into a project for the indie producer rate that you get. And if you just try to make that math make sense and the amount of money you're making per hour is like really just cents, if anything, and all of a sudden something that on the surface is maybe disregarding sort of like the hierarchy or your experience or your position that you've earned hardly on set. But I think if you think about it, it's no other model is going to be thinking about the actual hours that you're spending on the actual time that you're spent. Like it. I'm glad you brought that question up. Sorry, Clint, but were you gonna say something?
I was going to say, just to tack onto that, I think like one thing that gets lost on people who've not, I think a lot of people on this call might and in the chat here listening might know, but like most times indie producers also are the first ones to cut their salaries in half or cut them all together and end up spending 3 or 4 years on a project and then make like $1,500 off the whole thing, you know? And I think that's worth like, it's something that is also, you know, it forces, in the effort of fairness, it forces you to pay people sometimes who would give up their fee, you know,
Right.
because it needs to remain, you got to keep the model intact.
You kind of, I hope you're all keeping like one eye on the chat because I think people are really just so excited about every single thing that you're all saying. Yeah, thanks for keeping that chat alive. Well, Greg, you kind of answered this question a little bit by giving us that beautiful example of one of your PAs making a speech on their last day and just how unusual of a gesture that is and how it speaks to how the model impacted the culture on set. Can you also talk about how this model impacted the actual film? Like not just behind the camera, but how the philosophy behind it made its way into the front of the camera.
It's hard to quantify, you know, and yet at the same time, I feel absolutely certain that the movies that we've made are better quality films because of this. And I think the closest I've come to understanding that is, well, and I guess it's also about like, you know, process versus results. If you really think about the process at every level, if we're saying this is a community driven project, care a lot about the community we're working within, we care about the community of artists we're making it with. If that is the core sort of thrust of the endeavor, then you have to look at the process at almost like a microscopic level and ask at every stage, is it living up to that? You know, and the financial piece is one. The casting process is another. You know, how is that more humane and kinder and less transactional? You know, how is the set culture reflective of that? You know, and I saw it in a lot of specific ways in Broadways, you know, and in the Broadway, I see it in terms of this mindset shift, as I said earlier, from employee to partner. You know, if you're an employee, there is an inherent sort of punch in, punch out kind of feeling that you have, that you're working in service of someone else's business. But when you're truly a stakeholder and this belongs to you and there's a real ownership, that brings out, I think, more out of you into the work itself. Because I think there's this question kind of at work, you know, as we engage through this world as artists, you know, I think we operate oftentimes in a lot of these films like protecting a bit of ourselves, you know, artistically. But when you feel like it's actually yours, that this movie is part yours, that this really belongs to you, then this could be a film like maybe this time I empty the tank. We use that phrase a lot. Like this time I put it all on the table and give it all, you know, because I feel safe to do that and I feel welcome to do that. And at the end of the day, it's part mine. So that's the broad sense, you know, and then in the specific way, you know, when someone feels true ownership over the work they're doing, like I think that a big reason we shot on film, on this movie instead of a digital medium was our cinematographer, Pat Scola, with a lot of conviction and certainty and knowing the costs and all of that. We're like, this movie belongs with film, and had the kind of courage to really fight for that and stand for that, and was as a stakeholder with us. We took him seriously in a way that maybe in a different structure we might not have in a traditional hierarchy, and that sort of translated into a decision that was made. Yeah, there's examples of that really at every level, from our work with the cast across every department. I don't know, Monique, Clint, if there's any specific anecdotes that y'all remember from the time.
In general, I mean, and I think it was also a testament, Greg, to how you directed it. It was like erasing the hierarchy was truly, you know, it was a practice, so and I think that that's how it benefited. I think we see it in just the way that the film turned out. Like we always just talked about how do we create space for exchange and create space where people feel like they can bring their ideas to the table, which again, like if everyone's kind of coming from this hierarchical mindset, even if we say like, come on, Derek, share your ideas, like maybe not everyone feels comfortable because they're just not used to that, having that opportunity, to do that. So, and I think that was really just enhanced. Like everyone and so many crew members said to us like they had never been on a set like this before. And again, like ultimately it made a better movie because there was more input from everyone, on our crew, and in exchange with our cast and with the cast who were bringing like their lived experience, like a dialogue that was like constantly happening. And like, how do we tell this story in the most like truthful and honest way? So yeah, I think that's like kind of more intangible, but I think that it definitely contributes to what you see on screen.
Mm.
Yeah, without a doubt. When you guys were going through the process of negotiating and bringing parties on, and also financing and distribution, were there any like pushbacks or struggles that you guys dealt with during those things?
There was a bit more on Jockey when we were first doing it, because like it was much harder we didn't have anything to point to. And I do remember one moment in particular where cast reps are notorious for wanting to make side deals, and we had one moment where there was a key cast member who was coming on board and loved the project and everything, but their rep was like, "Great, I love this. This is fantastic. What a great model. Now let's make the side deal for my client." And we were like, just there's no side deal. Like this is the deal. This is the deal for everybody. Everybody gets the same thing. And there was a lot of back and forth to the point where the rep was like, "Okay, well, my client's going to walk. Like they're just not going to do this." And it was a really big moment for Greg and I to sit down and say like, "Okay, do we believe in this much to where we're willing to lose this person who we really think is perfect for the movie?" And that person is totally bought in and we're bought in with them, and on and on. And we just said, yeah, it's like, we have to hold the line. And then we got a call from that cast member, like literally like after making that decision, like 30 minutes later. And we thought like, all right, this is it. And that cast member was calling us because they were at Salvation Army shopping for their character's wardrobe. And buying things that they felt like would be like great for their character. And we were like, okay, great. This is like this is gonna be fine. But it's just like that like, and it was a little bit easier on Sing Sing when we like had a bit of like clout to say like, okay, this is it. Like we're not bending, and people are more apt to trust you because you have something to point to also. And it's something that Greg and Monique have both touched on, and I think it's worth underscoring that like there is so much scorched earth in the world of independent film, and so many people are just like, they are expecting that they're going to get fucked over, especially on the crew side and on the cast side as well, but especially on the crew side. They're just waiting for like, when is the moment you're going to fuck me over? And that is something that like Greg was talking about a lot, about like Monique and I like calling all of the crew members to tell them like, hey, this wasn't a bait and switch, but here's the thing. Here's how this is going to be different. And here's how it's going to be the same. And here's what we tried to do to make it worth our time still. And even now, when like we have money to share from the sale of the film with everybody, but it takes a long time. Like the amount of like people don't realize like how long it takes to like just get a deal signed with a distributor, and then how long it takes for like money to start coming in to where you can share it. And it's been a process of just like education and saying like, hey, here's the timeline it takes, here's the things we have to deliver, here's the things we have to set up just to be able to legally give you checks. And all that is more difficult, right, than doing it the traditional way, but it's totally worth it, because I think, to underline something Greg said, the process matters. You don't get good results just accidentally, whether you're building a fucking chair or you're making a movie. The process by which you make that thing matters very deeply.
I just want to add one thing on why actors join up, especially on independent films, and that's, we get a little bit lost in the deal. And I think a lot of producers and filmmakers sort of buy into the thing they're getting fed by the agents and stuff of like, we've got to chase them with money, and then oftentimes like the grossest thing is, the majority of an indie budget goes to one actor, and then the rest of the money is made on a rest of the movie is made on like a micro budget. But we got a lesson from a filmmaking mentor of ours before making our first film. Was like, never on an early film, never or really ever chase an actor with money. You got to feel the reason they're engaging is the work itself. And it's sometimes hard when money is the first thing that goes out related to this deal. You don't ever get to really feel out why this person is really wanting to be a part of this, and a big thing, much like investors do, cast has multiple bottom lines, I think, for doing an independent film, especially if they have a career in this business. One thing might be like they've been a supporting actor for a long time and this is finally their starring role moment, or they've been pigeonholed working in a certain type of genre and they get to cross over to this world and show another side of their range. Or in the case of Colman, a big thing for him, not only did he like believe in this model, but he saw an opportunity to bring all of himself as an artist, not just as an actor, but as a storyteller, and help us shape the script, produce the film alongside, bring his production company on board, and really have a voice in every aspect of how the movie was made. That, for him, someone who is a very in-demand actor and can be constantly working, these are things that are really driving his heart that we, got to like get a front row seat to and see why he was engaging, because this wasn't the thing that was dazzling and like leading up. The money wasn't leading, it was sort of the process leading. And we got to sort of pierce through and see why, not just our lead actors, but really it's a barometer, that you get to see why really anyone is engaging in your project when you kind of have a clear sort of system of values.
Here's a follow-up that I've also been seeing popping on in the chat a lot, but just curious about what are your ambitions for the future of this model? If like now what? And I guess like two-part question. If I am an independent producer, or if I am a student who's about to graduate and wants to produce, like how can I learn? Because I think we're getting a really, really clear sense about the philosophy and the why and like the big picture of this model, but people here keep mentioning it's like, what are the nuts and bolts? Like where can I see the spreadsheets? Like if you really if you want to cross into the bright side, and it's like, okay, I really want to consider modeling my movie around this, like how close are you to being able to make this like standardize it for other people to use?
Taking one part of it, of like, we get this question a lot because we say like, here's the model, Like it's very simple. It's 3 parts, right? And Monique laid them out and Greg reiterated them, and like, and then a lot of times people say like, yeah, but what's the model? And it's as if there's like more there, but it really is just that simple of like, pick your SAG scale, which you can't decide. Like once you kind of decide on your budget scale, that hits your SAG scale and that decides how much you pay actors. And so then therefore pay everybody that weekly or daily, and then share the equity in a standardized way, which we've developed our own way of doing it, but that's not the only way. As long as everybody's treated the same, and then do your best to like figure out a way to split money off the top, whether that's something super radical like we've done on one film, or something not as radical but still super meaningful on another film. And like I think that's I don't want to speak on Monique and Greg on your behalf, but I think it really is that simple. And I think like the other thing is like, in terms of the future, we always talk about like, make it better. Like go do a film and then call us up and say like, hey, I solved this problem that you guys didn't think about. And in terms of looking to the future, if everybody's doing some version of this, that really changes. It becomes less of just this thing that a few people are doing over here, and like it really changes the game in a way. And you really can just, if you come from a place of fairness, treating everybody by the same standards and being completely open and transparent, like you'll find your way through it.
We are wanting to open source more of the documentation. It is something that we're working towards in the future, and we'll plan to make it available. We've been approached by some, academic institutions who want to do like a proper case study on this that will have a lot more data to share. And it is something that we are intending to do. The thing that we were sort of saying early on is that the trickier thing that we're just figuring out how to navigate is like, how do we give you all as clear a sense as we can how this works while not breaching confidentiality agreements that we have with financiers and distributors. And so it's a needle hole to thread in conversations like this. We're not being vague to try and be a disservice. We're just trying to walk as close as we can to a line right now without stepping over it, and yet it's something that is important to us, is access to information. It was important to us on our crew, and it's important to people out there who are trying to get their movies made. Another thing that we're doing actively is that, Clint and I have started a new company that we're calling Ethos, that a big driver of this new business is to finance films on this model. So really the only rule being that if you embrace the philosophy that of this approach, go make your movie and we'll finance it. I mean, we're, not fully up to speed yet, and so I know for a lot of you guys are probably like, all right, I got ready to pitch. But that's coming, and that's a big priority for us. And so we're going to be piloting that, hopefully within the next year with a film that we'll be launching with, and then hopefully doing a lot more of it. And so we want to really be putting our money where our mouth is, and seeing how this can live and change and evolve beyond us, and multiply that impact. And so that's a big thing for us. One thing I wanted to also share related to like how this model works that I don't think we talked about yet is, one of the things that happens with this is not just the parity and equity and transparency, it's also lowering the overall cost of what these movies normally would traditionally be made for. And there's a lot of things that come within that. First, creatively, is like by lowering that risk, there's less pressure on the artists and they can make more intuitive decisions, casting, and not having to play the game of, the star system and the foreign sales stuff. That's, if any of you have ever waded into that, it's one of the most soul-sucking experiences you'll ever have.
Really, like awful.
Gross. Yeah, it's just a gross system. and it's behind, it's past facing rather than forward looking in terms of the actors of tomorrow. It's more, it's more about who's been proven doing the same exact film that you're trying to make, basically. And so a lot of things become very derivative and less interesting. And also just really, as we were making Jockey, everything that Clint had in his vision that was intuitive, the system was trying to steer him away from. And it was around casting and who we wanted to star in that film, which was Clifton Collins Jr., that we believed in with our full selves, and a lot of even the creative direction of where he wanted to take that movie. And by doing it this way and making, the model sort of on both movies helped us make these films for about a third of what they traditionally would have been budgeted for. And with that comes a ton of freedom creatively. To your investors, you're making a case saying, I'm lowering your upfront risk of what you normally would have to pay for this. To crew, you're giving them ownership in a place they normally wouldn't have ever had it. And then you have a chance of real upside, because if these movies would have been normally, 3 times as much, that's the win. That's like sort of the room of margin for a sale to actually be able to make an actual profit, not just for your investors, but for all of your crew and cast. And it then also becomes more approachable to distributors, and not only like being able to make a profit if you sell to like a streamer or someone, you're suddenly accessible to a lot more distributors than you normally would be able to reach, and actually make a deal with that makes sense for them and for the artists. So it kind of, lowering risk opens up a lot of doors in a lot of different directions that I think is important to mention.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. And I feel like right off the bat, people might be like shocked by it, but like when you really start to dig in, it just like makes more and more sense. For those people that are shocked by it at first and maybe are just like non-believers overall on it, what would you guys say to those people?
Monique, what do you think?
I might believe. I don't know. I mean, I think it kind of goes to the root of like why they, might be shocked. And again, like I think that there's just ways that, yeah, people don't, it's hard, like trying something new and different is typically just, scary at the end of the day. Like, is it going to work? And is there a lot of fear wrapped around that, or is there just like this sense that like everything in the film industry is just inherently corrupt? So it's like I totally understand like skepticism, but I think that just putting another point on it in terms of the transparency and the communication of it all, like, and I think this is something that Clint and Greg did and do really well. They did on Jockey, and then we, worked together to do this on Sing Sing, is like the communication was really a priority at all points. And I think that's one thing that, as a producer, you're not always thinking about that because you're putting out fires most of the time, right? You're just like, how do we keep this ship afloat? But having communication, it's like it almost could be described as another crucial tenet of the model, is just like communication and transparency with everyone, because that again, like they were both mentioning, it's like we're used to just being shielded and not really knowing everything that's behind the curtain. And I think that is I think that once you see the information, and once you understand like truly like how everything's structured, then it's truly just a matter of like, can you personally, like, when in terms of a crew member, like, can they personally take on the risk? Because there is, like, as Greg's saying, like when you lower the budget, your crew, as a crew member, you're taking on more risk, right? Because you're maybe like making less than you normally do. So, but you're, taking on that risk and then hopefully benefiting from taking on that risk in the success of the movie. So I think it's just like for people who are skeptical, is like understanding kind of the full picture that's really all that's needed. And then I think it's a personal decision of if you want to kind of work in that way or not. And again, like as I said, as a producer, and not everyone is down for it. Not everyone's like, this is a great idea. Like some people are like, it's not for me. Like this is not, and that's totally fine. But it's nice to be able to kind of determine that up front versus like starting a negotiation or kind of having someone sign on board and actually not really wanting to, and then they're not really, like collaborative in a way that matches up with the collaboration of the film.
Okay, we're 15 minutes away, so we're gonna enter our speed date. Oh my God, not
Speed
speed
date.
dating. You can tell where my head's at. We're
100
entering.
questions answered in 15 minutes.
Yes, we're
All right,
entering
lightning
this,
round.
this lightning round. So I encourage you all to keep your answers short so that we can get through as many of these as possible.
$5 an
Okay.
answer.
Did you start as an indie project and then enter the festival circuit to get financing, distribution? So this was
Both.
fully independent, and then A24 came on.
Distribution, yes,
both.
for both.
Yeah,
Sorry.
both films were made independently and then acquired at the festivals.
Next.
Did this model include PAs? The answer is yes. If things are based on time, does that mean everyone had to keep track of how many hours they spent on the project?
The week rates, were based on a 50-hour week on Sing Sing. And so that was guaranteed if you were on a weekly schedule or on a day rate if you were a day player. And then equity was not about like hours worked, it was about weeks, a minimum of weeks worked, so in production, the minimum threshold to earn the equity from that pool was 2 weeks worked at full time. So if you crossed over that, then that's when that would trigger you earning that equity, and that was then memorialized in an agreement with us.
How did you handle guild and union minimums having everyone have the same rate?
So this is something that we're both films were SAG was the only union that we were party to on Jockey and Sing Sing. Working towards the future, we want to see a world where we can incorporate all unions, applicable unions on our films. It's something we don't know how to do yet. We want to figure out. I think the way that would work conceptually is that whatever the highest is for that budget threshold. So if SAG is the highest union at that budget rate, that's what you would pay all the way across. So it would be maybe above scale for IATSE or WGA or something like that.
Okay, how receptive was the distributor to the royalty/backend profit model?
For the distributor, it doesn't change anything from there in terms of how the money comes through. It still comes the same way. And then it just matters how you split it as the filmmakers with the financier. And since A24 picked us up, but we can say that like A24 was hugely supportive of this and of this model and has continued to be without again breaching any contracts. They're very inspired by it.
And what we can say about Jockey, because we've already said it in other conversations, is with Jockey as an example.
Yes.
It was a sub $500,000 film. We sold it for 7 figures at Sundance. It was a 47% ROI to investors, and we issued more than the budget of the film to the cast and crew. And really special things happen with profit, that like one example from Jockey was one of our crew members had a bathroom half finished for 6 months, and the check came in for his piece of the movie, and it was the exact amount to finish that remodel of the bathroom.
How was OT handled on set? Was it just standard normal payment for overtime?
We didn't hit OT, honestly. Like we
on
the 2 films, like we didn't hit and it wasn't because we just said, hey, we're not going to do it. We had really stringent on both films. We had really stringent like paying double time for OT, and so you just find ways not to hit it.
Way to make us all look bad.
Sorry.
Gotta say though, yeah, I mean that was the thing that Greg also was very like adamant about in the beginning. Like we're not doing these like long days, and I think it does. That's another thing in terms of contributing to the culture. Like 10-hour day, 8-hour day is a beautiful
Makes
thing.
a big difference,
and people will have more overall stamina for your movie.
Any big lessons that you would take onto your next project? And sorry, in terms of like improvements for the model that you would take into the next project.
I mean, we are really curious about the union element of it, because it's not just allowing people to get hours towards health insurance and contributions to pension plans and things like that. That is something really important to us that we just have to figure out how to navigate around, like elements of like crew size and things, like some of the more stringent, requirements of some of the unions didn't, you know, fit the profile of what Sing Sing was. And I mean, I would love to see a future where we could bring all the unions to the table. And if you're offering true ownership and parity on project, maybe there's some kind of lane that, that they all agree to, that's like its own category for movies like this. So that's obviously very pie in the sky, but it's a future I'd like to see happen.
I assume you cannot answer this question, but I'll ask it anyway, just to keep things spicy. What was the base rate that everyone was paid, or a range?
What was our SAG?
That.
Yeah.
You can't. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
What was it based on?
SAG.
Yeah, SAG scale. So budget tier. Yeah, there's tiers. So there's SAG ultra low, SAG modified low budget, and then within modified low budget, there's actual considerations allowed to work on bigger budgets within that tier of like diversity and casting initiative, SAG background initiative. Then there's the SAG low budget tier, and then there's the high budget, I think.
Do you think this model lives and dies by having a known actor attached?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, because ultimately you want the best cast for the role. You want to find the best people for the role, and you want to make something that is, uniquely your POV and the vision of the movie. So I don't think that it's tied to it. It certainly, like in this case, like it certainly helped to have such an incredible, masterful actor in Colman Domingo being one of the first actors attached, and to kind of shepherd and to also say, yeah, I'm down for this, and like actually be down like with his whole team and everything. But I don't think that the movie lives and dies by that. I think you can do it without, an A-list actor.
Well, and we created the model on Jockey because the industry would not finance the movie on Clifton's name at the time. And that's a big reason why we sort of set out to do it. He was an actor that we felt like could make a very big statement, and his transition from a longtime character actor to starring the film would be like the story of the movie. But traditional financiers at the time would not fund us on that, and we're pushing it, Clint to have a bigger name. And that then became one of the biggest reasons that Sony Classics acquired the film, was his performance at the core alongside the filmmaking that Clint did. So that instinct that Clint had was one of the jewels, at the core of what the movie is and why we created the model in the first place.
That's what I was gonna say that too. Like it actually unshackles you from needing a big cast member. Because now go make like, okay, you've only got 50 grand to make a movie. Now go do it,
Well, before we let you go, I just want to leave you with a fun little question. You all get to answer it. Val, if you want to answer, feel free. If you were to win the California Mega Millions lottery jackpot, which is estimated at $530 million, how would you use all that money to help the independent film world?
Even though I was an accounting major, Clint always laughs at how bad I am at like math in my head, but theoretical ideas mathematically. How many movies could we make on the model?
You make $530 million movies.
Okay, done.
Tomorrow.
Wait, how many people are on this Zoom? 411.
530 million.
We'll make 411 movies. Done.
And then you'll keep the rest, of course.
And then I'll keep the rest.
Yeah. Clint, Monique, do you have different ideas?
I mean, obviously, I'd give it all to the Anti-Gravity Academy. And
That's great. We would split it 50-50 with Ethos, and agree to only make co-productions with you three. Clint,
obviously I would buy a yacht. I would not give it away to anybody. I would buy a yacht. I would disappear. A private jet that I don't even know I have. Val, what about you? I'm kidding, everybody. Sorry.
No, you're not.
I'm not sure. Pass.
Great.
What about you, Carlos?
I agree. I would invest it in ethos and anti-gravity collaboration to make as many movies as possible. Okay, on that inspiring note, on that prophecy, we're gonna end this amazing session. Thank you to you three for being incredible and really just like industry game changing. Thank you, Val, for being a great co-host.
Yeah.
And to all of you who showed up and kept the chat alive, thank you. Yeah, everyone kept saying that we should make DVDs out of this conversation and slip them under every Hollywood office, and we may just try to do something like it. Really can't thank you enough. I know that you're all in the middle of it, and you taking 90 minutes to share all your gifts means a lot. So thank you.
Thank you all for the great questions.
Yeah.
Really appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Carlos and Val and the whole anti-gravity team. Like I've gotten to know you all a little bit through the screenwriters camp, and yeah, it's rare to find people like y'all who share the same values and are just trying day by day to make the world a little bit kinder and this business a little healthier. Really grateful for y'all.
We feel the same.
Thank you all.
Many thanks to Carlos and everyone on today's panel for yet another excellent conversation about film production. Be sure to check out Sing Sing, now in theaters. You can find a link to tickets, as always, in our show notes. As I mentioned up top, this episode is part of Anti-Gravity Academy Satellite Sessions, free monthly conversations with high-level individuals in film and TV whose objective is to decentralize resources and information and make them available to as many up-and-coming filmmakers as possible. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, be sure you are subscribed to Dolby Creator Talks. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs, subscribe to our mailing list, and access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, including all of the other satellite sessions with Carlos that we've already released. Once again, these are brought to you in partnership with Anti-Gravity Academy and CAPE, the Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment. If you'd like to learn more about those organizations, you can find information in our show notes as always. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Colman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thank you for joining us.